hands. 1 second. All right, my people. Hello, Mr. Lovely Tech people. Thank you so much. All right. So, yeah, we've had some pretty crazy news over these past few weeks, huh? Yeah. I know. But I got to tell you, folks, let me see if I can move this back a little bit. Great. My expectations of what's possible have absolutely nothing to do with who's in office at any level. My work hasn't really changed course, since I've been doing this since actually 1997. I've gone through a few presidents, a lot of local mayors and other folks, and basically the approach to sustainability at the local level, in particular in low status community, the approach that we take is pretty much this. It's as if I was trying to sell a hairdryer. You still have to identify your market. You have to meet the market where it is, not where you think it ought to be. Okay, that is the first rule. And it is sort of looking like at it as a product launch. Whenever you're trying to do anything, convince someone to do anything, even to see their best interests, you've got to meet them where they are. And so this literally is the approach that we've taken for every single project that we've had. It's identify your market and or your policy need, design an attractive solution. And then, and again, it's a solution that's attractive not to necessarily to you, but to who you're trying to convince. Because, of course, we all have the best ideas in the world. But if everybody else doesn't think that, then nobody cares. Okay, get used to it. And then you have to look for your angel investment. And that could be money, clearly. But it's also just, do you have a set of influencers behind you who are going to say, you know what, that is a great idea. That is a great project. And then you have to try something. The world doesn't live in your head. You've got to put stuff out in the world for people to chew on, to really dig their heels into and see whether or not this is something even worth paying any attention to at all. And then you learn from your projects. You don't just sit back on your haunches and go, oh, isn't that great? Again, if you're the only person who thinks it's great, nobody else is going to care. And then after that, you've got to watch how people use it, and then you refine it based on how that goes. And so in my, I've got a bunch of my work done. This is one of the reasons why I'm like, okay, we're just going to have to roll up our sleeves because we've been here before. Granted, it's a little different, I get it, but, I got some of my best work accomplished during the Bush II administration. Nobody was trying to give us anything in low-status communities, okay? Remember, the head of our EPA was like, we could, raise the standards of arsenic in water, and that air quality thing, it's just a suggestion. That's what was going on as well. And in poor communities, low-status communities like the one I was from, this was a daily issue that we had to deal with. And so for us, it really was about how do we create, maybe thinking about this administration, maybe it could be a good thing for us, in terms of it's gonna force us to try harder, or at least I hope so. If that's something that we do, maybe we'll be a lot more creative in actually making sure we bring the right people, to the table, and more people to the table, so that it's not just this thing that climate in particular and sustainability and the environment are just these things that mostly white progressive people are interested in, okay? And really just understanding that all sorts of folks look at sustainability. They may not even call it that, but they're very, very, very interested in it. But again, it's about broadening, leveling the playing field and broadening the tent as to who's there and meeting people where they are. And again, understand that during times of crisis, amazing things have happened. Slavery, that very American peculiar institution, the stuff that came out of it, whether it was the blues that came out of it or among many things. And then we got jazz, we got hip hop, we got R&B, we got rock and roll. You're welcome. So, but because of that kind of level of adversity, things happened, and not to mention, I think, the civil rights movement, women's suffragists, all those things, that people started to see that nothing is impossible. If you can get rid of one horrible thing, then maybe something great could grow out of it. So I think that's how we have to start thinking about where we are right now. But, okay? So, but again, the approach that we used was really try to figure out where the dual goals, because when you're living in a really stressed community, low-status community in particular, your issue is not just the environment. It's the economy. It's the social issues. It's all of those things, so you cannot separate them. So my work really does sit at the intersection of the economy as well as the environment, because when you have those two things sort of stuck together and meshed together, then people will feel compelled to feel as though they can help be better stewards of the social part as well. So we need all those things together. And so all of the work that we did, so whether it was like looking at, I got my start, actually we were absolutely fighting against my own city for their really discriminatory solid waste management plans that absolutely discriminated against low-status communities, low-income communities of color within New York City. And so our approach really was we didn't stop fighting on one end, but we also worked to create, help a city understand that our communities had beautiful assets as well, in particular waterfront. Doesn't look like that there, but it was there. And so we took a huge amount of time to think about, well, how do we oppose the city on one end and work with them to develop the kind of waterfront property which would make them see that, look, this open space waterfront development is something that we need to see more of in our community. So I did get a tiny little seed grant from the U.S. Forest Service, actually, to start working on doing whether it was cleanups and to really help think about the Bronx River in particular as a place of new development happening, especially on the waterfront. And we had to work hard because even though folks were really clear about wanting more open space in the community, it wasn't in our DNA at that point. So we had to build, projects to get people down to the waterfront, to remind them that it was there and that we actually did have this, inherent connection to the land, that we knew and loved as well. And so doing things like environmental stewardship programs and boat building and just getting people down to the waterfront as a recreational, educational kind of thing was really wonderful. And this is one of my favorite pictures in the world because clearly I'm just posing and because I had done 7 years of work to get to that point for the groundbreaking, and being able to do that was really to get it from there to here, as what the first real waterfront park. Yeah. About 60 years, we had this, it took for us to have another waterfront park in the local community. And this piece of green infrastructure, I got married there 10 years ago, and it did as well. So it's kind of awesome. And that was the dog that literally led me into the park. It was really kind of cool, She passed away a couple years ago, which is just really sad, but that's okay. She's good. And so having a site like this to have it reflect well, on the people in a local community, again, it's a piece of green infrastructure. Actually, after Hurricane Sandy, I am positive that piece of land actually helped support there was two pieces of big industry right next door to it. We were able to because that was just like this stormwater management sink. A lot of the industries on either side didn't suffer the kind of consequences that they probably would have. And again, green infrastructure. And it's another thing about, Trump, quite frankly, that man's got a lot of waterfront property. He's got a vested interest in stormwater management. We need to start making sure he understands that there are jobs in green infrastructure and that this is a way to get a lot of people involved. Okay, I'm just saying. So that's, one thing to talk about. So another issue was looking at I actually supported and actually wrote the initial proposal that eventually brought more than $50 million worth of greenway infrastructure into the South Bronx. So that thing from stormwater management, developing these, and also traffic calming. Initially, this was not the kind of thing that the city wanted to pay that much attention to, but ultimately, when they realized that because of that $50 million investment, they got to redo some of the main, the sewage treatment, the water treatment that was underneath all that stuff, and we got green infrastructure associated with it as well, then it was suddenly like, oh, maybe we can pay a little bit of attention to you. And like, good, thank you very much. Again, you're welcome. So having seen things like this, and also just making sure that folks saw the connection between how, our infrastructure could not just be aesthetically pleasing, but also provide, again, traffic calming, and also the green and gray infrastructure, and also more connection, for a community that's been disconnected from open space. On the other side of this particular pathway is a 400-acre park in New York City, which literally was separated, the South Bronx was separated from it by about 25 feet of water. And this particular pathway, as it was designed, which now exists, and me posing in front of it, was able to make that facilitation happen. Another thing, stormwater management. Cities are dealing with this at an alarming rate. Not to mention the fact we deal with urban heat island, in fact, air quality issues around, the fact that there aren't so many vegetated surfaces in many American cities. And the stormwater management thing is this water treatment. It's for real. So every ounce of water that doesn't have to be processed through our sewage treatment system is like money in our pocket. So we need to be thinking more about green infrastructure in that way. And also, again, the issue around green infrastructure and what it does to actually cool down our cities is real. We did one of the city's first, actually, I think only community-led green and cool roof demonstration projects. Gosh, that was back, I think, in 2006. Yeah, it was. So it's like you could see the early stages of that kind of technology. It's just kind of cute. Very retro. But anyway, but now it is. It's like, oh my God, that was so old and back then. But anywho, it worked into something really beautiful. And what was more important was that we were able to develop a citywide coalitions with, again, really unlikely partners. Everyone from super high-end real estate developers, to faith-based groups and school groups who are really interested in seeing how you can create more opportunities around stormwater and managing it in a really smart way. We ended up with a tax abatement, $4.50 square foot tax abatement for green roof installations that actually also worked to help with urban agriculture as well in the city, and then also put that another piece of legislation that was specific to making sure that you included things like job creation, as you calculated stormwater management and other water, long-term pollution control in terms of long-term policies. So that was really important. It all came from that. We also showed that there was opportunities. That legislation also led to more roofing companies or even new companies developing green roof businesses in New York City, and actually we were one of the first ones. So this was a company that we actually started, that my nonprofit started, called Smart Roofs, and it was literally designed to work with folks that came from our communities, train them up in this kind of work, and then get them working doing green roof installation. And I was the first client as well. This was my roof. This roof is so beautiful now. It's even more beautiful now. I can't even tell you. But just imagine what it would look like, as all of our cities. And this is actually a real picture. But imagine, from Google, but imagine what it would look like, as we continue that kind of path. How cool would that be? And just imagine the stormwater management savings as well. But I've since sort of expanded my definition of environment and sustainability, which is, I think it's become broader to include how a whole community develops. Because the environment is not just the air you breathe. It is not just the water you drink. It is not just the food you eat. It is all those things and then some, because it's the community that you live in. And frankly, a community is an activity. It is not just a place. And as we work on developing, how we reach people in terms of developing climate solutions, it has to be incorporated in the environment that is where people are, period. And so, but in many low-status communities, these are the kind of things you see. Are these healthy choices? And I know Portland's a major foodie city, so this is probably like, you want to spray the holy water around and whatnot. I get you. I totally do. But, and these are not the kind of places you want to spend money. Even people from low-status communities would sooner leave the area in order to spend money in places like this. And you see all sorts of things, dollar stores and liquor stores. You're not going to be able to save money, if these are your only financial institutions. Check cashing stores and payday loan places and things like that. And you're also not going to see, wealth creation and generation if you're only seeing the kind of concentration of poverty, in terms of like overly subsidized, lots of low-income housing projects. And I'm not saying that all these things are bad and that it's like we don't need poor people and if they're horrible. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if we continue to concentrate poverty and all of those attendant features that you saw there, chances are those are also going to be the places where you will see the environmental issues that actually are the ground point zero for climate issues. There also happen to be the places, where the schools are worse, where the health statistics are much worse, where unemployment and incarceration stats are higher. It's not a coincidence. It is absolutely not a coincidence. And, I'm showing pictures of urban areas or inner city ghettos, as our president likes to say. But you know what? It could be the Rust Belt, where there's lots of white folks. It could be a Native American reservation. Those are the low-status communities where all of those things, they may look a little bit different, but that's where they are. So if you are thinking of, so basically from where we spent a lot of time talking to many folks, and in particular where, as a consultant, frankly, I wanted to get back home and do some real work as a practitioner. And so just to make sure that we were on the right track, we started working with a group of folks that we would just put out, information to about what we were doing just to get feedback from them. And, they're rather ingloriously named. It was an advisory board. But these folks ended up, really giving us the kind of, because we were really clear about where we wanted to be and also about expecting and desperately wanting feedback to make sure that we were on the right path in terms of the kind of work we wanted to do. They were just like, they willingly gave it because they were included, in the discussions. And I have to say, every single project I've worked on, with them, with their support, has gotten better because we actually bothered to ask. And then we also did hundreds and hundreds of surveys and just really got as many people involved as possible. And they also went off and did their own kind of thing because they noticed, like this particular picture I love because it's right behind them was one of the city's most dangerous intersections, actually number 2, for pedestrians. And so they were really clear with going to the city and being like, listen, this place needs to be done and here's why. And the department, the head of the Department of Transportation was not willing to actually have a press conference unless she knew that those people in the red shirts were going to be there. And so that's the kind of power, that's the kind of buy-in that we can have when we do this work. But you have to ask for it. But it's out there. I think if I could be so bold, and I will be, to say one of the reasons why our president-elect spoke really clearly to some folks who needed to feel like someone was listening. He spoke to their fear, but they responded. We can do the same thing, and not with fear, but with real solutions and with love. But the Hunts Point Advisory Board kind of really gave us marching orders as to how they wanted to lead, in terms of their hopes and dreams and aspirations for a future that included them, that saw us, as folks who could help them realize some of those dreams. And these are just some of the ways that they looked at it. They wanted to build community. Remember, community is an activity. It's not just a place. They wanted beautiful things around them in their own community. They wanted to feel healthy. They wanted jobs, stuff that produced jobs. They were not happy with the fact that, a kid growing up in their community, especially if they were a smart, hardworking kid, would probably want to measure success by how far they got away from their communities. And they were really curious as to what kind of developments would actually make people want to stay. And, they did, because it was just like, how many people move to a place because there are more community centers? Almost nobody, okay? But that's what we keep putting in low-status communities, and people are like, yay. Like, no, they're not. The second they can move, they go. So, okay, I'm sorry. Well, thank God some people get it. But But it's true. It's just like, listen, people want vibrant, thriving places. And so that's, especially in low status communities. And so that's why people grow up and want to leave, because they're not there. So how do we build that up? And again, the environment is all of these things like wrapped up in one. And so some of the ways that we started doing it is true. My husband and I are in a joint venture with this amazing coffee shop owner called Birch Coffee. And, we did it not because I wanted to be a barista, even though I am, and I could pull a mean shot, honey. I'm going to tell you. Okay? But we did it because there weren't places in our communities. I remember the last coffee shop we had in our community in the early 1980s. We don't have places where you guys take for granted, where you can hang out and, do a business deal or organize or do stuff like that. We didn't have stuff like that. So we built one. Literally, like me, which is crazy. But, who else was going to do it? My partners weren't even thinking about coming to the Bronx, but they did when we kind of broached this idea of doing a partnership. And it's become this really kind of interesting place, and that people will flock, that come to, because it is a place that is beautiful and that speaks to what they want to see, in their own community, a place to gather that makes you feel good about being there versus, some place that makes you feel poor and broke. And that you're getting, somebody else's toaster leavings or something like that. Another thing is that, people were really clear, we are lacking these spaces, and that we're also lacking new business opportunities for people to develop their own jobs. Huge interest in culinary arts within our local community. So one of the things we did, we acquired this building, which is actually one of the great American architects, Cass Gilbert. This was a rail station that he did that sort of fell into disrepair and was shut down to rail service a long, long time ago, and we were able to acquire it. And our goal is to transform it into something like this, which is called Bergen out in Brooklyn. But it's basically 4 small kitchens that provide. It's a restaurant incubator. So essentially, it's a low barrier way for local chefs to enter into the restaurant space, because we take all the risk out of running the dining hall and the bar, but they get to actually do their food. And so essentially it's a really low risk way for folks to do it. But again, creating that kind of space and making it look something more like Cass Gilbert's original vision with these beautiful terracotta tiles associated with it is a way to kind of transform that space into that. Another thing that's come up is literally local job creation and responding and preparing people to participate in the economic drivers of the day. Which are generally of generations, when it comes right down to it. Technology is one of them. We've developed a market-based solution that literally met people where they are, as a way to sort of get them involved with entry-level jobs in the entry-level jobs in the tech sector, but with career ladders. And so we looked at software testing, which is usually offshored, realized that we could add a little bit of value to it for, clients domestically, and then, train people to do the work really quickly, but in our local community in order to see that happen. And generally, I don't like to show graphs and charts in any of my presentations, but this was just to show that the software testing market is huge in the billions and continuing to grow. And the blue part is the type that we do, which is a specialized app testing that has to be done by a human. So, because you need that kind of cultural fluency to make sure that it happens. And so that's why I show it. I just like big numbers. But ultimately, this is the real reason why we did it, because we wanted people to see, black and brown people in our local community doing technology. And this is the kind of industry that we think has a replicable potential, because I have actually gotten lots of interest from other folks, other cities around the country, to create this kind of B2B, of business to business, social enterprise in technology, because what you need is any place that has a thriving tech sector probably also has a low status community that probably needs, entry-level access into the tech world as well. And these kind of fellows are these really kind of crazy things. I'm not sure if you guys get them out here, but every other day I get these kind of notices showing up at my door with people trying to buy my house for cash. Okay? This was my favorite one, I have to say. It's just like simple. It's like a little cartoon. But ultimately, you see it in low-status communities, folks with buckets of money, who are basically building off of the idea that people in low-status communities often are, not as financially well-versed, but they see an opportunity in terms of how quickly they can gentrify this community from the outside. And what we know about gentrification now is that it happens long before the doggy daycares and the white folks move in, okay? It starts happening when we tell smart, hardworking young kids that they're going to grow up and be somebody, and that you can only really be somebody is if you pull yourself up from your bootstraps and get out of the neighborhood you were born and raised in. But what that leaves is an enormous reinvestment gap that then leads to gentrification, because folks don't value those communities, and it makes it easy for somebody to come and swoop in. The problem is we sell early and we sell too fast. But imagine if we were able to say to folks that own property in communities right now, if that literally stay a part of the deal, whether it's through land leases, when the people who own the land, they are actually a partner in the development, versus just selling it outright. And, land lease, that's the whole, island of England. That's how much of it happens. Wealthy neighborhoods, it happens all the time. Doesn't happen. Nobody asked these folks to do it. So, but imagine if we were able to literally, new developments that happen, the most sustainable, beautiful development in the world, that actually part of it is owned by folks within the local community as well. People would be very, very interested in seeing more of that kind of thing happening, I think, if we had really left the intention of that happening in. And so this quote was written, as part of the letter from a Birmingham jail that Dr. King wrote. It was after a response, a bunch of people, mostly white. Actually, it was an open letter from a group of white ministers who were asking him to kind of slow down on this integration talk. And, he was in jail at the time talking about integration. And this is an amazing letter. If you haven't read the whole thing, it's a short, quick read, but this is one of my absolute favorite lines. I hope, sirs, that you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. That is the way that I feel and have felt every single day since I've been doing this work. It is almost 20 years at this point, especially when we're thinking about low-status communities, and the fact that I do truly believe that if we had concentrated the kind of burdensome, environmentally dangerous things in wealthier and usually whiter communities, the same way that we do in low-status ones, we would have had a clean and green economy a long, long time ago. But we didn't. So now we have this amazing opportunity, and we should have legitimate and unavoidable impatience, especially now, since it seems like a bunch of people all flipped out over our next president. Use that. Use that to show what we are actually made of. Use it to show that we can actually be pushing for the kind of more sustainable, let's really let's find the market-based solutions to pushing renewables. Let's not forget that lots of stuff also didn't happen over the past 8 years either. So, come on. You had it easy, all right, allegedly. So now let's do some more, because you know what? We've got to get to the point where we're just like, no, this is not enough. And you know what? Whether or not we like it, he is our president. We're going to have to deal with it. And we need to find the kind of common way, find a common point where we could actually get some stuff together with him. And the sort of crazy administration that he's got. I get it. Believe me, I do. And even as I say that, I'm like, oh boy, is it going to be hard? But it's not impossible. And you know what? I know it won't be possible if we don't try. And what have you got to lose? What do we have to lose? And what do we have to gain to be able to say at the end of this 4 years the kind of crazy goals that we were able to accomplish. So, are you guys with me or not? Thank you.